Have you ever watched a movie or even a YouTube video and wondered, how can I get my videos to look like that? The truth is, there is a whole lot that goes into why movies look like movies, but one of the elements within the filmmaking process that could truly impact the way that your viewers perceive the story within your film and your videos is lighting. Now, there's a whole lot within the world of lighting and cinematography, but the good news is you can get this look too. And I'm gonna show you how by sharing some of the things that I've learned over the years of my career, as well as break down this scene here. So let's get into it, friends. Hey, what's happening? My name is Ryan, and if you're new with us, welcome. I truly appreciate you being here. At the beginning of my career, lighting was a bit of a mystery and also kind of frustrating because I knew that it was important, but I couldn't fully understand why or how I could use it effectively. And I certainly didn't know that the way you approach the lighting in your scene can highly affect the way that the audience perceives the story, at least not yet. It wasn't long after that when it really started to click, and I really was able to utilize the lighting in the scene to evoke the mood and the tone that I wanted the audience to feel in that moment of the story. Story is arguably the most important element within the filmmaking process, and lighting is such a powerful tool to engage us and draw us into the story with our characters. So when we light with story in mind, where story comes first, this is truly how you get that cinema-like or cinematic style scene for your videos or your films, which actually leads me into my first thing, and that is to always put the story first and lighting your scene to complement that story. If you've been on YouTube for some time learning about filmmaking and watching videos about filmmaking, you've probably come across the word cinematic, but what does that actually mean? Now, there are many interpretations for the word, but for me personally, and for a lot of my filmmaker friends as well, this just simply means to achieve something that looks, sounds, and feels like something you would see in a movie in the cinema. Therefore, it being more cinema-like, which is basically what cinematic means, cinema-like, cinematic, but let me explain. Typically, when movies are made, there is one thing that everyone is keeping at the forefront of their mind, and that is to create a world where the audience feels like they are in this story with the characters. We want the viewer to feel invested in the characters and in the story and not distracted by the way the scene was lit or how the film was made. Now, of course, there is a place for that. That's why there is BTS footage that you can watch. But as we are in the story, the main focus is to create a world that feels relatable, even if it's more of a futuristic or stylistic type of scene. Now, it's important to note that this look won't work for everything. For example, a beauty commercial is typically going to be a very low contrast ratio, meaning that there are less shadows and depth within the frame, and it's just going to be brighter and more evenly lit. Whereas typically in a movie, you would have a higher contrast ratio, meaning there's more of a stark difference between your highlights and your shadows. But now that we know what this means, how do we achieve this in our own work? Well, to fully understand this, at least in cinematic style images, we first need to dive into why we use lighting in film at all. When I first started to really dive into lighting setups and cinematography earlier on in my career, I was amazed by how much light can make a huge impact on the scene I was filming. So much so that I would tend to overlight things, meaning I would just bring in lights just to bring them in. And I didn't really fully know why I was doing that. But then I quickly came to find that it's important to maintain as much information in the highlights and the shadows as you can, and maintain all of that information so that we can have all of that in post-production. I've talked about this a little bit on this channel before, but digital sensors will typically have a harder time maintaining all the information within the highlights and the shadows, whereas film stock can do this naturally, and this is what was used on Hollywood sets before there were digital sensors, which is one of the reasons why we associate old film stock movies with that cinema style look. So if this is the look that we're trying to achieve, it's important to remember to maintain as much information as you can. For me, keeping all of this in mind just helps me not to overlight and actually be more intentional with my lighting, which actually leads me to my next thing, and that is to justify the studio lighting that you would bring in to the frame. This is also called motivated lighting, and we have talked about this quite a few times on this channel. However, in this video, I'd like to go a little more in depth so that we can fully understand all of the things that we just learned and how we could use this to get the look we're going for. This really is a crucial step if you are looking for this cinema style look for your films and your videos. So let me explain what I mean. Let's say you're on set to film your scene, but it's too dark so you need to light up your subject. So you bring in a key light, but now it kind of feels unnatural. It just doesn't feel like it belongs. There's no reference for this key light, and therefore, whether consciously or unconsciously, our brains are thinking, where's this light coming from? So how do we fix this? Well, you could bring in a practical light or any kind of ambient light source in the scene. Ambient lighting is just any light within the room that you didn't bring in yourself, such as a floor lamp, candle light, or even window light. But I don't just stop there. It's not enough to just motivate your light. I'm also thinking about brightness, color temperature, and light placement. For example, if your studio lighting is too bright, then it's going to feel unnatural. Or if your color temperature is off, for example, if you have a warm candlelight within the scene, but the key light on your subject is cool, then it feels kind of weird. This could definitely pull the viewer out of the story, which is where you want them to be. So keeping these things in mind as you're setting up your lighting and you're filming your scene can really go a long way. So now that we know how to light for story and get that cinema-like style look for your films and your videos, my light died, so I'm gonna plug that in, but let's also break down this scene so that you can see everything we just learned in action. Okay, so here we are now breaking down this lighting setup, starting with the gear. First, I use my Sony FX3. There is no particular reason why I'm using this. You can use any camera that you have available to you. On that, I'm using the Freewell V2 magnetic ND filter with the glow mist on top of that. Let's talk about lighting. For this one, I just used all lights from ZHIYUN. The first is the MUSICBED G300, which just came out, and I could not be more excited for it. Super small, super compact, and extremely powerful. As a matter of fact, it has a setting where it can go from 300 watts up to 500 watts just at the click of a button, which is absolutely insane. It's also bicolor, which I actually utilize in this lighting breakdown, and it also has a 7.5 meter long cable. Now, the reason why this excites me is because there are often times where I need to get a C-stand way up in the air, and I can't because now the control panel is just no longer accessible. It also has a new cooling system that is supposed to help with the performance of the light, which is also extremely quiet, which is a huge comfort of mine when I'm doing a documentary interview or a corporate video or something like that. I think some of my favorite features are some of the smaller things that kind of slip under the radar, like the light stand grip. I love these grips, but also it has a top handle grip, which is super helpful. It's just little things like this that truly make it feel like they were thinking of us the entire time they were designing this light. Now, I am gonna do much more of a deep dive review on this. I just wanna have it for a little while before I do that, but there'll be links below for everything if you're interested in getting something like this. The other light that I'm using is the brand new MUSICBED X60, and I love this light because it's extremely tiny and outputs a ton of power for a little 60-watt light. Not only is it RGB, but it also is bicolor, which I really utilize in this video. As a matter of fact, I'm using this tiny little light as my key light, but we're gonna get into that in just a minute. Now, there have been many reviews on this light all over YouTube, so definitely check those out if you'd like to learn more. But I am gonna do a dedicated video for this light as well, where I'm gonna showcase its capabilities and really test its limits. I'm really excited about this video, and I think it's gonna add a lot of value, so stay tuned for that. But beyond that, I just used the Fiber Array M20C, a tiny little 20-watt lamp that I actually already did a video on. I'll link that video down below, as well as the MUSICBED G200, which I also used in that other video. Again, I'll leave a link below. Now, this video isn't sponsored by ZHIYUN, but they did send me these lights to try out and see what I could do with them. I wouldn't recommend a product unless I absolutely loved it and I loved the brand. And for me personally, everything from ZHIYUN that I've used, I loved. So if you are in the market for studio lights and you're looking for something small, compact, powerful, and its quality, definitely check out any of the lights that I mentioned today. If you have any questions on these lights, please let me know in the comments below. And I just want to give a huge thank you to ZHIYUN. All right, so enough of all that. Let's break down how I lit this scene. So the main point of this scene was to try and utilize all of the different things that we learned in this video. And I decided on a night scene, which I actually shot in the middle of the day, but I tried to make it look like night. So I had to play around with color temperature, lighting angles, and motivated lighting to kind of make all of this work. So here's what I did. I had my space here. This is the back end of the studio. And then I just brought in my wall on wheels to cover this space and just make it look a little bit more cozy, like it is a living room. And I have the couch here. Oh, these are starting to look a little bit better. Okay, and then I just had the camera here, and actually it was kind of off to the side just a bit hitting my face on this side here. Okay, so how did I light this place up? Well, first I knew that I wanted to have kind of a moonlit scene, as if there was window light on the left side of his face. And I did that so that we can have a little more depth in the frame by utilizing color contrast. So all I did was I set up this makeshift cucaloris here, basically some blinds that I made and a light through that with a reflector cone. For this light, I used the Molus G300, only had it at about 2%, which is really all I needed. Again, like we had talked about before, if the light is too bright and it starts to dominate the scene and doesn't match the rest of the lighting, then it starts to look a little bit unnatural. So that was just shining on the wall here, providing our emulated blinds. I also set that to a cooler color temperature. I think it was about 6500 Kelvin, and that just acted as our moonlight. But then I knew I was gonna want to have a cooler tone, but also have some warmth within our skin tones to make it look a little more natural. So what I did was I set my camera to 3000 Kelvin, bringing it down to a cooler temperature and also kind of accentuating that emulated moonlight. And then I brought in the Molus X60 as a key light, and it did just fine. As a matter of fact, I think I only had it at around 20 or 30%. I put a lantern softbox on that actually, and I put the skirt on just a little bit to kind of have a little more control over the light that was spilling in the room and only focusing it on me. So as I'm shooting on the shadow side, I'm adding depth with light and shadow. But I also, with the warmer tones and the cooler tones, I'm also adding color contrast, which adds a lot more depth and texture to the scene. I set this light to 3000 Kelvin to warm up my skin tone a bit. And this is how we get that cooler tone in the background and still have those warmer tones within my face. By setting my key light to a warmer color temperature at 3000 Kelvin and then setting my white balance on my camera to 3000 Kelvin, which is a cooler tone, this balances everything out and therefore accentuates the color that I wanted for this moonlight. But like we talked about earlier in the video, this light wouldn't make sense because there is no point of reference. We don't know where this warm light is coming from. So that is where our practical light comes in, this little floor lamp. But that also too wasn't enough to fill in that corner, that space. So I added the ZHIYUN M20C and I set that to 3000 Kelvin and I just faced that on its back, and that just kind of filled in that space a little bit more, making it seem like the floor lamp was lighting up that space. Also, one important thing to note is that I have our key light on the same side as our floor lamp, and that's because we want this light to seem as if it's lighting up our subject's face naturally. Beyond that, I just kind of played with color a little bit, like with the orange couch and the blue background. That really popped out a bit. And then I just added a couple of plants, picture frame, and a couple other things to make it seem a little more like it was a living room scene. One thing I forgot to mention was that this light was spilling kind of on this side of the couch, giving this unnatural look. To kind of remedy this light spilling over the couch, I just added some negative fill right up to the edge here so it doesn't affect the light that's spilling on the wall here. And then one final thing that I did was I added just one more light on the shadow side, and this was the Molus G200 with another softbox, and I actually set that to 4000 Kelvin, something in between, so that way it didn't seem like it was too warm, but it also lifted the shadows a bit on this side of my face, and it also kind of, you know, filled in the space a little bit more. Now, again, this is just a personal preference. I believe that this is what truly keeps the viewer engaged in the story, which is the most important thing of the whole filmmaking process. All of the tips in this video are essential for achieving that cinema style look. However, just like any rules, these too can be broken. There are many great films who don't follow all the rules and can make a really awesome, really engaging and impactful film. But with every great film or video, there is always the number one thing, the foundation that every decision is based on, and that is story. So I just want to encourage you to take these tips, practice them often, and start applying them to your work, because understanding lighting and cinematography at a deeper level and practicing these tips as often as you can is really what's going to set your work apart from all the rest. But truthfully, the secret to any good film, video, or story is you. Your passions, life experiences, and everything that makes you you. So just get out there and make some films, because you've got this, friend. Well, that's gonna do it for me. Thank you so much for joining me in this video. If you liked this video or you learned something, please click the like button down below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.